Welcome back to Live, Lead, Legacy, where we explore leadership, innovation, and certainly the legacy that we wish to leave behind. I'm really excited about today's conversation. I'm sharing the stage today with a gentleman who is one of the more foremost thinkers in our industry, the workers' compensation industry, as it pertains to pharmacy and the drugs that we utilize to help injured workers get better. We're going to be talking about certainly some of the more controversial topics in our industry, like compound medications, very dirty phrase in our industry. We're going to be talking about a drug that is now being utilized to treat PTSD, chronic pain. Of course, I'm talking about low dose naltrexone. And then we're going to talk about everything in between. So without further ado, let's dive in and welcome again to the Live, Lead, Legacy podcast. Welcome.
Thanks for having me, Carlos.
Absolutely.
Very excited to be here
Absolutely.
today. I've been waiting all day for the podcast to begin.
Well, we've been working hard, right? Technology
Yep.
doesn't always cooperate.
That's
and so
right.
here we are several hours later, but we're doing it. And I'm excited that
we're doing it for you guys. We're ready to go.
Well, I'll tell you, when we initially set this up, Robert, I got really excited because quite frankly, this is an area, the topics that we're going to dissect today are items that I don't think that we talk about nearly enough in our industry. To some degree, the pharmacy vertical has become somewhat taboo, in my opinion. That's just my opinion. Some may disagree with me, and that's totally fine. But you as an individual are very interesting in that you've lived in this world for such a long time. You're comfortable in it. You navigate it well. You're passionate about it. I don't want to tell too much about you. I'd rather you do that. So let's start at the beginning. Tell us about Robert Nickell, what initially ignited that passion for you in the pharmacy vertical, and what carries you through today. So let's start at the beginning. This is where we do the black and white.
This is where Carlos throws me the hard ball, not the softball. I guess you could say, if you really wanted to look at it, that I'm a middle kid. So I have my older brother who was king and my younger sister who was princess. And I'm the guy that's going, hey, I'm here, I can do stuff. And that's what kind of gave me my motivation and my drive through life, to always try to be out there and doing the best that I possibly can in the process. And in third grade-ish or so, my dad's like, who wants to be a pharmacist when they grow up? My brother's like, nah, I'm going to pass. And I'm like, we have a good life. That seems pretty nice. I'll do that. I'll be the pharmacist. And so from third grade on, I worked in my dad's pharmacy. And I did everything. And that was kind of, a lot of times people will say, if you're going to run a business, you need to know how to do everything in the business. And then they proceed as an adult to try to learn how to do everything in the business. Well, I learned it all from third grade on. So I never worked for anybody else but my dad and then myself. And it just helped me grow and learn and see how he did and how he treated patients and doctors and the interactions and how he helped and cared for people. And I always tell people that today I have 5 different businesses that I run and almost 100 employees, but I run it like a mom and pop because that's how I was raised.
I love it. When you think about, a pharmacist back in the day, Robert, I immediately think about like the Ward Cleaver times, someone that you go to on the corner, someone that you deeply trust because you're talking to them a lot of times about your personal medical information, right? Does that resonate with you? Do you feel like there were customers of your father's that would come in and have long conversations, long, intimate conversations about personal information? Does that resonate?
Absolutely. That's how my dad operated. He knew all of his patients. And the one way that he taught me was, I got my driver's license and he goes, okay, now you're a delivery boy. I'm like, oh, okay. And he gives me 10 bags and says, go deliver those. So I do that and I come back and I thought I was doing really good by doing it quick. Boom, boom, boom. I got it all done. He's going to be so proud of me. And he goes, well, that was fast. And I said, yeah. And he goes, so what's the name of the dog for the Joneses?
Oh.
I'm like, I don't know. He goes, oh, then you didn't do a good job, did you? He goes, how many kids do, the Smiths have? I'm like, I don't know. And he goes, well, when you deliver the medication, if you don't get invited in, you're not doing something right. And he goes, you need to get in there and you need to talk to them, not about their health care. I'm a high school kid, but about them. And that was his whole thing with personal touch. And when you reach that level of personal touch, then that's when people open up and you're talking about it. They would literally, my dad was that corner drugstore guy where they
Mm,
would go to him, tell him what's going on. He knew the doctors then. He was the referral source. He was the gatekeeper. He'd be, well, you need to go see so-and-so for your dermatology, and you need to go here and you need to go there. And it's, people are not naturally personal.
sure,
They
sure.
have to feel trusting,
Yeah.
confident.
They have to feel that they're in a safe space and talking to someone that they trust in order to be able to open up.
Yeah.
Your father sounds like he really valued the human side of his business, right?
Right.
Oftentimes, particularly we talk about it a lot here in the US, right? Capitalism and how oftentimes companies, small and big, only care about the profit margin. It sounds like your father really saw a benefit in investing not only in the business, but in the people that consumed from his business, which is awesome. So you mentioned a few moments ago, Robert, you owning a few businesses. By the way, congratulations on all your success. I like to tell people I'm a 22-year overnight sensation.
There you go. Right.
It
That's what I was
doesn't
going to
happen
say.
overnight,
You can
right?
say congratulations on my success, but as far as I'm concerned, I'm still on the road. I'm on the road to success.
There you go.
Uh,
I'm curious, it sounds like your father was just an amazing role model for you, not only from a, you know, human and mentor standpoint, but also from a business standpoint, really modeled some great qualities as a leader for you. Thinking back to those times, Robert, was there a specific moment that you can think of that you said, you know what, that's when the entrepreneur bug hit me? Was there a moment in time as you're thinking back to childhood or maybe even, your college years when you felt like, I want to be an entrepreneur. This is what I want to do.
yes. And it's has to do with my dad's pharmacy and also doesn't. So my dad had me come in, and this was probably sixth grade. I think it was sixth grade. And he goes, you can sweep the floors. And I'm like, well, how much are you going to pay me?
Hmm.
And he said, well, I'll pay you $1 an hour,
A dollar.
or you can pick anything you want on the toy aisle. And I was like,
Okay.
huh. Like da 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 da. And I'm thinking, I'm like, I'm gonna do toy aisle. So I swept all the floors. I don't know how many hours it took me. It didn't matter because I was a sixth grader, right? So I'm, mind is wandering. I'm just sweeping floors and picking
Yeah.
up stuff. And then I got to go pick out something, and they had these stickers that came 10 stickers to a bag. And they were these little hang 10 fuzzy feet.
Hmm.
And back then, people were putting them on their book covers at school and on their little folders at school and things like that. Anybody who had the little foot on there was like popular, became like, wow, that's really cool. So I took all 10, went to school, and I sold them for $1 a piece. And I got $10. And I'm like,
Wow.
oh, I did much better than $1 an hour. And that's when the
Wow.
entrepreneurial side
Yeah.
hit me. I always watched my dad. I knew he was in business. I knew he was doing things, and everything's a transaction. But when I actually did it myself, and the kids at school would be like, oh man, I'm so glad you brought these. Oh, this is so great. And I'm like, but you could go get it yourself. But no, it was the convenience. It was the service. It was having it. And they had $1 and they gave it to me.
I love it. I love it. Well, you have a very interesting backstory to you, Robert, that's for sure. Something else that's interesting to me is the love-hate relationship that workers' comp has with the pharmacy industry. Um, on one hand, you've got claims adjudicators, claims administrators, even employers, right, that love the use of certain medications to help injured workers and patients recover quicker so that they can reduce the cost of disability, the cost of potential litigation, right? On the other hand, they hate certain medications, right? That for a long time have plagued our industry due to cost, due to ineffectiveness, right? Due to, quite honestly, danger that's provided to the people that work in our industry and that we support. I'm curious how you, as a pharmacist, as an entrepreneur, as a business owner with the various companies that you have in the space, how do you see that role evolving long term, right? Both from an insurance perspective as well as from a pharmacy perspective. What is ahead for us there?
That's another question that needs to be unpacked. Let me start with drugs
Yeah.
and pharmacy and the relationship with claim payers. And I think the number one thing is that 99% of every injured worker gets a medication treatment. And those medication
Mm,
treatments are refilled every 30 days or every 90 days. As opposed to if you get a surgery, you get it once. Now, if you get an X-ray, you get one. You get an MRI, you get one, maybe at different points in time or something like that. But the medications are consistent and constant going through the process. So I think that's one thing that creates almost an industry within itself. Treatments, medications, claim adjusters, it's got it all tied together.
mm.
And some drugs are more expensive than other drugs. And some drugs are very, very inexpensive. And then some insurance carriers are running their own mail order pharmacies to try to control the, the spend, if you want to call it, in the process. And you're going to have to repack this for me because I kind of forgot where we were going.
Well, I think that quite honestly, we're asking individuals who aren't technically trained to make certain decisions make these types of decisions. I'm talking about, placing responsibility on a claim adjuster who's not a medical professional, doesn't have a pharmacy background, to either approve or deny a medication for the claimant, for the injured worker, the patient, to either get better and return to work or follow a different path, right? So, my question, I guess, is, you know, what are we missing here, right? From a pharmacy standpoint, but also from an insurance standpoint? Are there some dots that we need to connect? From my perspective, education is key. And I think that there's a great deal of misunderstanding, great deal of lack of knowledge at the front lines with claims administrators who are giving this responsibility to adjusters who, again, don't have the technical training to make a very critical decision for these injured workers that, quite honestly, depend on these drugs, right, to feel better. So, I guess what I'm asking is, from your experience in this industry, how can we best reach these folks on the front line to give them the information that they need so that they can make the right decisions on these claims?
Well, the decision is the healthcare provider. So your physician, your clinician, your nurse practitioner, APRN, PA, the person who's running the diagnosis is the person who's prescribing the drugs. No, it's not the pharmacist. Pharmacist doesn't prescribe drugs. So what we're really asking is we're asking for a non-medical degree claims adjuster to tell a 12-year degree orthopedic surgeon what drugs is appropriate for their patient. That's where we have to get, because this is too extreme. This is too extreme. You can't give, just freestyle on either side. But how do you get here? How do you get to the middle? And that's where I think, the next decade needs to progress to. We need to find that. And whether that's a good spot for the pharmacist, which it really is, because nobody in the healthcare industry knows drugs and pharmaceuticals better than pharmacists and their method of actions and channels and adverse effects and how they work in the process.
I couldn't agree with you more. I think that one of the things that has plagued our industry for so long is that we tend to move in extremes, right? Much like a lot of different parts in this world. We go from one extreme to the next very easily, and it's hard for us to really find that balance. But having that collaborative approach, I think, between the claims examiner, the provider, and everyone else in between is going to make sure that we don't create a system where we're erecting all of these barriers that make it very difficult for a good doctor to prescribe the right medication. And ultimately, it gets paid so that the patient can feel better, get better on their way to recovery. That's the hope for the future. Absolutely. One of the hottest topics that we have debated in workers' compensation, I'm going to say for a decade, maybe longer, Robert, is the topic of compound medications. It's a hot button. And I dare say that maybe some of my carrier friends that are watching this right now are probably shaking right now for what we're about to say. And maybe even some claims examiners out there that just get really nervous when you talk about compound medications. From your perspective, why do you think that the work comp industry has just gotten so passionate against the utilization of compound medications?
Let's break it down, and let's go with compounding it. And besides that, just so everybody knows, I taught compounding at USC School of Pharmacy. I taught beginning, I taught advanced, and I taught FDA regulatory affairs.
Okay.
So I have spent a lot of time in compounding. I've been compounding pharmaceuticals since 1983. And I've done hormones and eye drops and ear drops and suspensions and pediatrics and orthopedics and injections and pretty much everything. And it's a chemistry side that certain pharmacists love to do. Compounding in itself has been around, if you really want to say, all the way back to the Romans, right? That's what everything was made originally from herbs and leaves and teas and topicals, and topical application of a drug was
So
the
my
number
mother,
one
under
way
your
back then.
definition, my mother was a compounder. She used to give
Okay.
me, this and that and this and that, rub leaves all over me all the
Yeah,
time when I
right.
wouldn't feel good.
Yeah, and there's a thing to that, because our nature is medicine, and that's what before we invented synthetic medicine.
Right.
They learned over time, oh, this particular plant helps your headache. Oh, this particular herb does this or that. When my dad was in pharmacy school, they actually had a course on herbs and plants.
Interesting.
And how they worked. But let's go forward from there, way forward, 1,000 years, right? And compounding in a pharmacy standpoint has probably been around since the 40s. And so for the 40s, the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, early 2000, compounding is terrible. All the way up to that point,
Right.
compounding is fine. It's okay. There's no problems. We'll talk about the terrible side in a minute, okay? But this beginning portion of time, it was a normal part of medical practice. If somebody did, 90% commercial oral meds, they're probably automatically doing 10% compounded meds.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And also back then there was no regulations. I was in high school compounding for my dad. So I'm a high school kid, but I mean, I could do it. I was, making creams and stuff. We had a dermatologist that had his office behind the pharmacy. And so he was always writing all these different prescriptions that he wanted to have made and things like that. And there's also a pride. There was like pharmaceutical elegance where you'd have your jar and you'd whip it up off the top and then put the lid on. And you had to have enough in there that the top could be whipped properly and the lid could be closed without getting any of it on the top of the lid.
Okay.
Yeah. So my dad would come in and
there was an art.
Yeah, he would screw up in that lid and I go, oh. And I'd be like, it's good, right? But so then when I got out of pharmacy school in the 80s, in the early 80s, that's when modern compounding started. And there was a business in Texas, and they were going around to the pharmacies and saying, hey, we have a capsule making machine. We have some scales that you could use. We have some turning rods and heat things and more of a chemistry lab type situation so that we could get better in what we're doing. And that worked really well. And I was involved with that. And we did that in the 80s. We did that in the 90s. And then, and we did it with workers' comp. And it was no problem. It was not any issues whatsoever. And then around 2004, maybe, somebody found out that you could build a compounded drug and with the ingredients, with NDCs and AWPs, all of a sudden have a compounded drug that has a billable of $500 or $1,000 or $1,500. And that's where it got out of control. So a lot of people who have been in the industry for 2 decades might think 50% of the time it was okay. And then the last 10 to 12 years, it's taboo and terrible.
Right.
But it was actually corrected in 2017. So really we're looking at 2004 to 2017. It was bad.
Mm.
And did it get bad necessarily by pharmacists? Not really. It got bad because of money people coming in and going, oh my goodness, we can bill $10,000 and get paid.
Right.
And they started creating this whole industry that changed everything that was happening in the process. After 2017, that's when everybody put down the pendulum, right? And they said, over. No more compounds, right? Especially in the work comp world. There's like, no. Well,
the pendulum just swung
exactly what you were saying, right?
Totally.
Yeah. Okay. So that's work comp. Woo! one side to the other.
Yeah.
But I think now people need to start taking a breath, and they don't just have to say compounding is the evil villain. Compounding is still that necessary part of medical care and treatments. And it's definitely a part of injured people, injured workers. And it's needed.
Yeah.
Of course, it's not needed at $10,000 a compound, right? So at the same time that 2017, when that got started, there was a pharmacy up in New England, and that pharmacy up in New England has nothing to do with workers' comp, but they were making an injectable, and it was kind of like the opposite. They were selling it for $25. And there's no way you can make a sterile injectable for $25.
Right.
But they were doing that and selling it to hospitals all over the country, because the hospitals were like, oh, I can buy this for $25. I want to buy it all day long. And so they did. But this pharmacy was not sterilizing their injection.
Right.
They were just, whipping it up and doing their thing. And eventually they introduced bacteria, and that bacteria got injected into people, and people died.
And just so I'm clarifying here for myself and also for the audience here, Robert, the bacteria was introduced as a result of what exactly?
Negligence.
Okay. Them cutting corners, maybe?
Cutting corners, right.
$25 is not a great budget to develop
No, you can't do it.
a sterile environment.
No, it would cost me $200. I would see those come through in the hospital. They can you guys make these? I go, yeah, I can make them. There's $200. They'd be like, no, we can get it for $25. And I'm like, well, I would tell them flat out, there's no way they're doing the testing. There's no way they're doing everything they're supposed to do to get it for that price. So these guys ended up having a big problem, another black eye to compounding. So Congress stepped in, and this actually happened in 2013-ish, but it really didn't get implemented until 2017. So Congress steps in and they create the Drug Quality Security Act, and they say, we are going to allow the FDA to oversee compounding. The state boards of pharmacy are like, no, you're not going to take that away from us. So we had this battle between Fed and state. Nothing new in our world, right?
Yeah, I was going to say, they sure fight a lot.
Yeah, and it got into our industry.
Who's got the power anymore? Yeah.
And so what ended up happening was the FDA got to control their area, and the state boards of pharmacy got to control their area, and there became a separation. So FDA said, what we're going to control, we're going to make these compounders / manufacturers follow GMP. GMP is good manufacturing practice. Good manufacturing practice is what Pfizer follows, Glaxo follows, everybody follows GMP. There's no GMP light or GMP heavy.
Just one standard, yeah.
Right, one standard, and you have to follow it. So a lot of people said, well, we don't want to be in that industry. And I like a challenge. So I'm like, I'm going to be in that industry. So that's how I got into it.
Got it.
But it's every single thing that we do is exactly what's done at the drug manufacturing level. And compounding went a different route. They went with what's called United States Pharmacopoeia, USP. So USP has a chapter called 797. They have a chapter called 800 and different things like that. And so USP 800 covers, sterile compounding. 797 covers non-sterile compounding, and they live in a different bubble. I operate in both. I have the state pharmacy type compounding practice, and I have the FDA type compounding manufacturing process. And they're both at a super high level today in the process. So the level, I guess what I'm trying to say is the level of concern of anybody who thought compounding was not safe has been overcome in the regulatory side, because the regulatory side now is saying, we do not want another pharmacy killing people for 25 bucks,
Mm,
right? And from the work comp side, if you want to say that, work comp is we are not paying for another
right.
compound at this number. So the whole world changed
Yeah.
right during that time period. We can also then go into COVID, right? We're talking 2017. Well, 2 years later,
Sure.
or 2.5 years later,
Yeah.
we're in COVID.
Right.
3 years to get through COVID. We're talking 2023, 2 years
Right.
ago. Isn't it time? Isn't it
Right.
time for work comp to go, okay, let's find a system that pays the pharmacist for compounding the drugs and gets that needed compound back out into the system.
Well, this is certainly a timely conversation for that. I think that, as we continue to look for ways to advocate for patients, to advocate for a system that has as little friction as possible, because friction introduces additional cost, right? Everybody will admit that. This is an area where I think there is an extreme amount of friction. Maybe not so much by the bill review companies, because it's a very easy decision for them. It's not on the fee schedule. It's not in the evidence-based guidelines. So the answer is no. It's a more difficult question to answer by the provider who wants to see their patient get better. And it's even worse for the patient who wants to feel better and get back to work, right? So it's a very timely discussion to have. I'll be frank with you. I've been in this industry 20 plus years. When I was working at a company that developed evidence-based guidelines, my perception of compounding was that it was the wild, wild west, right? There was no consistency. There was no oversight. There was no quality control. And as you're talking now, I'm realizing it couldn't be further from the truth.
Today,
Today,
in
back
2004,
then,
20 years ago when you started, absolutely.
wild,
Right.
wild west.
Right.
Absolutely.
In some areas, not
And-
all areas.
And it's unfortunate, right, that we've had to learn so many valuable lessons as a result of failures in that side of the industry, the compounding side. But to your point, I think it's time for us as an industry to start having these conversations. How can we provide reliable medications that are compounded to our patients, to our injured workers, in an effort to try and get them to recover faster, get back to productivity, productive endeavor, and back to regular life, right? From your perspective as a pharmacist, Robert, what would you say, in addition to my misconception about just this being underregulated, are there any other misconceptions that you think exist out there in the world, particularly in the insurance world, about compounding medications? Like, do you see the same type of efficacy with these drugs as you would a regular non-compound medication?
Yeah, you can't compare. So the industry talks about FDA approval, right? And a lot of people just think FDA approved or FDA unapproved. Unapproved. Oh my
Mm.
God, it must be terrible, right? All the FDA, or not all. FDA, if you're listening, no, sorry.
Yeah, they
What-
watch Live, Lead, Legacy all the
Right, I
time.
know. They're trolling you. The FDA, an FDA approved drug is really an FDA approved use of the drug. When you say it's FDA approved, it's only FDA approved for a very specific indication, clinical indication. For example, gabapentin in workers' comp is one of the most universally used drugs. Probably 80% of injured workers at one point in time are getting gabapentin. Well, gabapentin is FDA approved for post-herpetic neuralgia, meaning you previously had a shingles attack
Mm.
and you're still feeling pain. And so they have a clinical indication that says, well, you could take gabapentin to help release the nervous tingling from your post-herpetic event. But everybody else uses it what they call off-label.
Mm.
So when you use it, the label says clinical use for post-herpetic neuralgia. That's why they call it off-label. So off-label means you're not using it for what's on the label.
Right.
So as soon as you're using it off-label, it's not FDA approved. But it's still gabapentin.
Right.
It's still the drug
Yeah.
that's used to get that FDA approval process. So a drug itself
Mm.
is not FDA approved. A drug's use is FDA approved. And then FDA approved, they talk about and I'm going to get to compound, this ties to
Sure.
compounds, but safety and efficacy, right? So everybody in your mind, you instantly take it to it's safe and effective. And if it's not safe, if it's not FDA approved, it's not safe and effective. So therefore, you shouldn't take it. But what about all these people taking gabapentin off label? Well, nobody's proved that that's safe and effective for the uses that they're using it for. And when you approve something for FDA clinical use for a specific indication, it's based on risk. It's based on, is there enough risk for giving this drug to help the patient versus the adverse effects and the things that can happen over here? Everybody hears when you're listening to an advertisement, right? What do you hear at the end?
Right.
You know, diarrhea, nausea, migraine, headache,
Right.
hair fallout. And you're like, going, what?
It's a lot of, yeah.
I guess I'm supposed to ignore that. Okay, I'm going to ignore all of those things and just get my drug that's going to make me smile and be happy. So it's an interesting thing. And it's something that's gotten driven into our society and into workers' comp as well. Well, if it's not FDA approved, it is no good. If it's not FDA approved, it's not safe and effective. If it's not FDA approved, we can't use it. We can't put it on our formulary. And that's far from the truth. Grandfather drugs, like, for example, nitroglycerin, that you put under the tongue, right? That's not FDA approved.
Interesting. Well, that's certainly a misconception that we have, right? Certainly a myth that everything that is not FDA approved is therefore unsafe and ineffective for the use, which, to your point, isn't necessarily the case, not even often, it sounds like. I mean, certainly you don't want to take things willy-nilly, right? But your doctor, you have to listen to them. They know what they're doing. So let me ask you a question. If I'm a claims examiner, and again, this is information and education for us that don't live in the pharmacy world. So I'm sorry if I'm asking elementary questions here, but the doctor says, Carlos, I think that you would benefit from, a dose of XYZ, right? What does that process look like then for this XYZ compound medication to then be developed and it being delivered to my doorstep? What does that look like?
Well, in today's world, we're going to talk about it. So in the regulated world we talked about earlier, we have USP and we have FDA. So that prescription would fall under USP. So if I got a prescription and let's say, we're just going to say it's a nasal spray for headaches. And the doctor has read an article from someone in Switzerland who's been using this drug as a nasal spray, and migraines are improving. And he looks at it, and he or she, and they look at the drug, and they look at the chemical structure, and they're like, wow, that makes sense. Because that's what they call it, the practice of medicine, right?
Right.
Everybody's practicing. And nothing is like, if we froze in time, it'd be insane. So the doctor writes a prescription for you as the injured worker because you have migraines, and it comes to me. I'm the pharmacist, and I'm going to compound it because it's not available commercially at this point in time. And I look and I see, oh, I can buy this chemical, this API, this active pharmaceutical ingredient, and I can get a solution because I'm looking at this. It's a soluble drug. It's soluble in a certain oil-water combination. Okay, I know my chemistry. So I can solubilize the powder. I can get it into the nasal spray. I can squeeze the nasal spray. I can see the thing comes up. I can measure how much came out. I can then measure if 2 pumps equals how much dose of how much API the patient's going to get into their nasal passageway. And then I have to take it and I have to send it off for testing to show that, like, if I say my final formulation is going to have 10% of drug X in the nasal spray, then I have to prove that. In the past, you didn't have to prove it. In the past, it was all black and white mathematics. Now you have to prove that that is the case. And then you're granted 30-day expiration date. So if I'm going to give this to you and you're going to use it up and we're going to be done in 30 days and you maybe get another one, that's okay. But if you want to have it for 90 days or 120 days, then again, I have to prove that the potency stays. And I have to prove that nothing grows in my nasal spray that I just gave to you. So there's so many checks and balances that my nasal spray that I made for you is every bit as good as any other nasal spray that you could get from Big Pharma. The difference is it doesn't have an FDA approved clinical indication. That's the difference.
Got it. So from a quality standpoint, from a safety standpoint, certainly as rigorous, right, as the process that any other big pharma product goes through. The only difference is the label that it carries on it, whether or not it's FDA approved. And in this case, it would not be.
At this side here, the FDA side.
Right.
So if it's called an FDA outsourced facility. And so if I made my nasal spray, now, okay, let's do that. So if I make my nasal spray over here under USP, my final quality is very good. And we've done the checks, we've done the balances. I can make this in less than 30 days. And depending on what it is, I could probably make it in a day. Over here, it takes me 18 months and close to $1 million, huge amount of testing, more testing than I could even describe in our podcast.
Wow.
And so over here, yes, 100%, just like Big Pharma, everything is GMP and and everything's tested and everything's looked at and the FDA inspects it. I mean, it's just 100%. Over here, it's a compound that is 10 delta better than we did in the 80s. And it's very tested and it's mathematically and chemically and chemistry perfect. So yes, you can get what you want, but not so it's cut and dry, as you said.
Right. Yeah. I guess from my standpoint, Robert, I think that a lot of folks wrestle with how much oversight and scrutiny goes into these products, right? What I'm hearing you say is quite a bit these days,
Yes.
right? It's not the wild, wild west. It's not a pharmacist, bored in their lab concocting some form of drug cocktail, right, to give to a random patient, but it's very specific for a very specific need that a doctor is looking to fill with their patient. Is that what I'm hearing you say?
Right. Well, and also pharmacists, I have my nerdy side, my chemical side that I like. And in the 80s, I compounded a product called Go Lightly, which is Go Lightly today for colonoscopies, but I made that before it was on the market. I was the #1 compounding pharmacist in Southern California making Go Lightly for colonoscopies in the process. I made Rogaine, minoxidil that you spray on your hair before Rogaine was out.
Oh.
So it's not Wild West. It's chemistry, pharmaceuticals, and thinking what's best.
Right.
Somebody comes to you with an issue and they say, my child is breaking out and they're having this rash and they're having this itch. And I'm thinking, God, we ought to do a Neosporin combination with an antifungal. I make that for them. The doctor, hey, doc, he already likes me, right? I think we should do this cream and do that. Okay, let's give it a try. We give it a try. We put it on the patient, clears it up, and there you go.
Yeah.
But it's because we know drugs.
Right.
So it's not Wild West, but it is creative thought.
Sure.
And it's in collaboration with the clinician.
Very much in line with the practice of medicine and the philosophy that is adopted by professionals in both of these spaces, for sure.
Right.
Yeah. So let me ask you another question. Compound medications, is there like a great example that you can give us that you're like, this is a great example of how well compound medications, when they're done right, can help people? Is there an example that you can give us along those lines?
I can give you one, and it's I didn't make it, but it's personal to me. So I did both knee replacements, and I had an option of getting opioids, Vicodin, Percodan, or getting what's called a nerve block. And so I opted for the nerve block because the nerve block was a bupivacaine, which is, you've heard of lidocaine. So bupivacaine is like a stronger, longer acting lidocaine, for lack of better description. And it comes with a pump, and they run a catheter into your knee, and then it blocks the nerves in that area. So that it allows your knee to heal over a 5-day period. the highest amount of pain that you have after a surgery is within that first 24, 48, 72, 60-hour time zone. And if you can somehow block it and allow that pain and the body to heal, you get past that opioid phase. So I got my Q pump and I opened it up, and the pharmacy that made it for me is a friend of mine. So I'm calling him up on the phone. I'm like, hey, I got your Q pump. And he compounded it in sterile compounding. It was bupivacaine. They're in Colorado, by the way.
Nice.
Yes, I was located in Colorado.
Colorado does a lot of good things, right?
They do. And, I used my Q pump and my ball, and the little thing squeezed away automatically, and I got the bupivacaine, and I didn't take any opioids at all. And the first day when you're done, the very first day when you're done, you're like, oh, and you get through that night and then you're okay. But that's an example of a compounded drug, patient-specific compounded drug, sterile, that helped me. And I tell everybody, I go, if you're going to get knee surgery, knee replacements, you better get a Q pump. Yeah, it's the way to go.
Instead of, having to navigate the risks of opioids.
Right.
And what is one of the common byproducts of it? Constipation, right?
Oh, yeah.
And then you have to take medication for constipation.
That's a whole, okay. And that's a whole nother thing in workers' comp.
Right.
We get it's called the cascade.
Right.
And you have this drug for your inflammation. Well, the inflammation causes your stomach to burn. So you take this drug to stop your acid. And what nobody thinks about, okay, so a proton pump inhibitor, PPI, inhibits any acid being released in your stomach. Well, don't you think you need that for digestion?
Right.
Right. And if you're not digesting your stuff, don't you think you're going to get constipation? Right. So you have an anti-inflammatory that causes you to take a proton pump inhibitor that causes you to take a stool softener in order to prevent that. And, it's just this cascading effect of things that happen. And that's where the pharmacist could come into play.
So, one of the things that I think initiated the work comp industry's avoidance of compound medications was just the rampant abuse that happened a number of years back that you mentioned earlier. If you had to give some advice or guidance to claims administrators or adjusters or really, employers, right, who are ultimately footing the bill on separating responsible, effective compound use versus abuse, what type of advice would you give them? Like, what should they look for in order to make the distinction accurately?
It's money,
Price,
right? Unfortunately, unfortunately, price is the number one determining factor. So you could say, go to the pharmacist, ask how it's going to work, how's this going to happen, go to the clinician or the prescriber and say, is this really what you think is going to be best for your patient? All of those things are in queue. And then I think we just need to figure out a way to put a legitimate and reasonable price control on the compound so that the claims adjuster doesn't have to be concerned that it's going to go from this to this. And I think there's no other way to do that other than fight it out with fee schedules or contract with a compounding pharmacy that you have an agreement with, and you say, okay, any compounds we get, we're going to just send this way, and it's going to be billed out at X amount. And, that's another way as well. But then that, directs care and changes business, and people have, like anything, right? What did we just say that a minute ago, right? It's fed and state.
Yeah.
It's this opinion and this opinion. Everybody has an opinion. How do we get there? Right now, we're not getting there, and the patients are not getting really the best treatments that they can get. They need commercial FDA clinically approved drugs, and they also need compounds.
So let me ask you a question. One of the fun things that I've seen just on your LinkedIn was your affiliation with the sports world.
Whoa! I do have an affiliation with sports. It's a passion of mine. Thank you for asking.
Well, I'm just curious because we often talk about how our aim in workers' comp is to treat our injured workers like they're professional athletes, right? We want to give them the absolute best care that's available. We want them to recover ASAP. I mean, some of these athletes, Peyton Manning, for example, right, had multiple neck surgeries, comes back and wins a Super Bowl after that. Is that even humanly possible? Well, clearly, right?
Mm.
But it's because they have the ability to utilize the best care, right? They don't have the limitations that workers' compensation has around the type of care that they receive. It's all paid for and received, right? And there's a lot more collaboration there. So, my question to you is, the sports world, you often see, athletes rubbing things on their bodies. I'm assuming, and put me on the right path here, Robert, but are those compound medications that they're applying on their bodies? What is your experience like?
Generally, yes. I would say there's two types of topicals that are used in sports. And by the way, just so you know, I was where's my tag?
I think it's on the back. Oh no, it's right there. Yeah,
Right
yeah.
there.
Team
Oh, there we go.
USA.
There we
Yeah.
go. Yep. On the Olympics 2004. I was the first pharmacist that got to be on the USA medical team. It was quite an honor, and
Mm,
I enjoyed it very well. And we actually did compounding at the Olympics in our USA Village dispensary
wow.
that I ran at the time. In the professional sports world and in Division One and other levels of sports, they do use topicals. Topicals are very common, and they could be in the OTC side and also in the prescription side. And they do rub them on. The other things too, like Peyton Manning, like you said, they get at the top level. It's not just the drugs.
Right.
It's physical therapy, and it's high level machinery and all the different trainers that are that say we need to work on this muscle right here, and you go like this for 20 minutes a
Right.
day and things like
Right.
that. But there's certain drugs that work topically that don't work as good orally, where you can
Mm,
get localized effect. And one of them is we were talking about the cascade, right? But the cascade started with the anti-inflammatory, the non-steroidal anti-inflammatory. And one of the reasons is if your shoulder is hurting you, right? And you put something in your mouth and it goes into your stomach, and then it has to be absorbed into your bloodstream, and it has to go up to your heart, and then your heart has to pump it out
right.
all over your body so that your toe gets the same amount of therapeutic benefit as your shoulder.
Right.
Doesn't that seem crazy? Right?
It
It seems
seems a
like,
lot longer. Yeah.
well, a lot longer. And why do you need so much in your bloodstream
Mm,
to get to your
yeah.
shoulder? The drug doesn't know to go to your shoulder.
Right.
But if you rub it on your shoulder, well, now it knows to go to your shoulder.
Mm,
So there's certain drugs that can be absorbed transdermally based on molecule size and based on how it can get in. And there's all kinds of articles and studies and reports, and these drugs are available all over the world. You can get them all over the world. Here in the United States, if you can't get a patent, no one's going to make it. So that's why it falls kind of into the realm of compounding. There is one drug out there, which is a diclofenac, 1% or 3%, which is an anti-inflammatory. But in order to get it to the market, they had to agree to this very low therapeutic dosing. And if you look at the package insert says to apply 4 grams 4 times a day. That's more suntan lotion that I put on if I'm in Mexico.
wow.
And it's because there's no way, and it doesn't make any sense to do that. So most people take it, they screw it up, and they put a little dab on, and they rub it in like this, and they're not getting any benefit at all.
Mm,
So in sports, we used to do indomethacin and naproxen and clinaril and diclofenac and ketoprofen and ibuprofen and all the different ones. And ketoprofen rose to the top over a 12-year period. Over a 12-year period, more athletes were asking for ketoprofen than they were any other anti-inflammatory. What that means, they just mean athletes try anything once, but if they start asking for it on a regular basis,
right.
then there's something that's working there.
Right.
But so if you take it and you put it locally and you put it on your shoulder, you're going to get localized action, and you're not going to get that cascading problem the way that you would the other way.
So, what I'm hearing you say is that some medications are better absorbed through the skin when you apply them topically, as opposed to having to ingest a lot more of that medication so that every part of your body has it to make sure that it covers the part that actually needs it.
Right. And the same thing works with gabapentin. We were talking about gabapentin
Hmm.
earlier. So gabapentin, you have to have the dosage has to be 1,800 milligrams, 2,000 milligrams, really high dose in order to because now it's not only trying to get to your muscle tissue, it's trying to get to the synapses.
Yeah.
So it takes a high dose. And the thing with gabapentin is it crosses the blood-brain barrier. So as soon as you have this extremely high dose crossing the blood-brain barrier, then people are getting fatigued and they're getting
Yeah.
dizzy, they're getting
Right.
forgetful, hallucinations, all kinds of stuff are
Mm,
going on. So what does the patient do? The patient cuts back on their dose.
right.
Cut back on their dose, well, they're not getting the right treatment. Gabapentin is one of the molecules that can be applied topically. So you have shooting pain down your arm, we can put gabapentin on your arm and it has a better chance of getting to the synapses than taking such a high dose and causing CNS issues.
Interesting. Interesting. All very valuable information. If you're a physician out there and you have some thoughts on what we're talking about, by the way, I want to be very clear with our audience today. This is not medical advice at
Yes,
all.
right.
This is for educational purposes only or informational purposes only. But by all means, if you're a physician out there and you're listening and you have thoughts on what we're talking about, please leave us a comment and share this information with whom you think would benefit from it. So I want to switch gears a little bit here, Robert. And whoa, man, you just changed again.
Oh, yeah. How long have we been here? Like 10
I know.
hours already? I'm
It's been
tired.
10 hours. Yeah.
Because a little podcast.
Just
You
a
come
little
back for
one.
a little one.
Here we are, 10 hours later.
Yeah.
So I want to switch gears a little bit here, Robert. And I want to talk a little bit about a drug that is starting to bubble up now in the ether. I'm talking about low dose naltrexone.
Mm-hmm.
Naltrexone or naltrexone? LDN for sure.
I call it Trexone, but
So I want to read a couple of snippets that I came across in a couple of medical reference guides, and then we can kick off our conversation. Walters Kluwer's up-to-date reference guide talks about LDN for fibromyalgia. It says low-dose naltrexone, LDN, refers to a dose of roughly 5 milligrams. It's thought to reduce chronic pain through the enhancements of endogenous opioid system and antagonism of non-opioid immune receptors with consequent modulation of central nervous system microglial cells. Evidence to support the use of am I saying that right
yes,
or not?
it's good enough.
Well, I'm not a doctor
Right.
here. Bear with me. Evidence to support the use of LDN is mixed, according to Walters Kluwer. One small double-blinded study that randomized 31 females with fibromyalgia to LDN or placebo found that pain was reduced more than those taken LDN compared to those with placebo, 29 versus 18%, which is pretty interesting. The ACPA Stanford Resource Guide says LDN is an opioid antagonist or blocker when given at a low dose, typically 4.5 milligrams nightly over 6 to 8 weeks. It has been found to be an effective treatment for chronic pain. LDN can be a particularly helpful medication for some individuals because of the low side effects, right? The low side effect profile. And then I want to read you what AI said, which I think is kind of interesting. Not that you should take everything that AI as irrefutable evidence, but food for thought, right?
Food for thought.
LDN is used off-label. We talked about off-label uses earlier for a variety of conditions, meaning it hasn't been officially approved by the FDA for those uses, but it's still recognized for its potential benefits. Here are some of those conditions that LDN is currently being used for: fibromyalgia, which we just read about; chronic fatigue syndrome, which alleviates fatigue and pain; Crohn's disease, which I think is interesting, improves quality of life and promotes disease remission; multiple sclerosis as well is another condition that apparently it's been used and found to be effective by reducing pain and improves mental health related quality of life; chronic pain. Chronic pain is a major cost driver in the workers' comp industry, as you know, and it provides pain relief. Autoimmune thyroid disorders as well may help manage symptoms. And long COVID, interestingly, it's currently being studied for its effective on it. But there is a host of conditions here that we're seeing that LDN could potentially be effective for, right? For those of us non-pharmacy, non-medical folks, as you just heard me butchering this explanation here, can you, in layman's terms, explain to us what LDN is?
Sure, I can. So low dose naltrexone, LDN, came about in the early 80s. And originally, let's go back a little bit further. There's a drug called naloxone, which is Narcan, which they use for instant withdrawal from drugs,
Mm.
right? And they have the Narcan sprays that everybody's using. Originally, Narcan was only injectable. They tried to make an oral, and the naloxone was not absorbable. It just wasn't bioavailable when it was put in the stomach. So they made a synthetic difference to it and created naltrexone. And naltrexone then was available orally for drug toxicity and withdrawal. So that became its standard of how it was used. That became its FDA approved clinical indication. Now it's on the market. In the 80s, when HIV came out, doctors started reading more, experimenting more. Global conversations were taking place across the world, and they were experimenting with everything that you could think of. And there was doctors either within the US or outside that started doing different doses of naltrexone in their experimental properties because if it was helping with the pain, how was it helping with the pain? And so what they ended up finding out was using this low dose. Usually it's, like I said, you said 4.5 to 5 milligrams. 4.5 is the standard that I've been seeing lately. 4.5 milligrams a day. You have to build up a dose to it. Usually start at like 1.5 and then 3 milligrams and then 4 milligrams and 4.5 or whatever. And you get there. But if you think about your nervous system, okay, the whole nervous system, and then you think about a cell, everything in our body, we're cells, right? We're made of cells. Go below cells, we're chemicals. Go below chemicals, we're electricity, electrons, protons, neurons,
Mhm.
right? So at the cellular level, there's a cell, and it's called microglia cell. And that cell is given the job of managing the nervous system. So if your nervous system, which includes your brain, your spinal cord, and all your nerves that go out through your body, is overreacting for some reason, like I think we mentioned autoimmune
Mhm.
diseases in
Mhm.
there. So an autoimmune disease basically means that your immune system has gone backwards and now it's attacking yourself because
Mm.
it's thinking that your own body is the enemy, the autoimmune, right? So the microglia cells can either turn that on or turn that off. They're the switch. And if they are turning it on, they're releasing a chemical called it's an enzyme, a protein called a cytokine, and the cytokine is excitatory. So they release cytokines, and it causes the nerves to get excited. And another way to say it is inflamed. We all
Mm.
know what inflammatory is,
Yep.
right?
Mhm.
So you take an anti-inflammatory for your inflamed muscle. Well, the microglia, and I know you want to lay terms, but it goes way deeper than this. Okay, I'm up here. It goes way
Okay, all
deeper.
right. We
Okay,
trust you. We trust
right,
you.
right, right. And I didn't know what level we were going to talk about here. So, but anyway, so you think of pro inflammatory versus anti-inflammatory,
Right.
right?
Right.
Antibiotics versus probiotics.
Right.
So the microglia causes pro release of cytokines, inflammation of the nervous system.
Mm.
And so that's kind of the nutshell. So then how does it handle fibromyalgia? How does it handle
Right.
chronic pain?
Right.
How does it handle all of these different things that you just talked about? Well, it talks about it because it becomes this immune modulator. So you have your immune system has gone wacko for
Right.
so long
Right.
that it needs to get calmed down.
Mm.
It needs to remodulate. It needs to do exactly what we were talking about with workers' comp.
Right.
Get to the center.
Modulate.
Right, modulate. Maybe we have a new term.
I know.
Workers'
I
compensation
like it.
modulation.
We should make a T-shirt.
All right, good. I like that. I'm in. I'm an entrepreneur. I'm in.
So I get what you're explaining, and it sounds like we've got, a modest amount of research and at least documentation that LDN is looking to be effective to prove or to treat these conditions, off-label use, right?
Off label, right?
Um, Is there any literature out there, or do you have any consensus-based information or guidance that you could give us, Robert, on the use of LDN for other conditions other than pain conditions, or is that primarily it's
Well, I think there's more people suffering from pain than anything else.
that
So
makes
if
sense.
you're
Yeah,
gonna go to AI, a Google search, National Institutes of Health search, any of those, you're gonna find more articles on pain than you're gonna
sure.
find on the other symptoms. You're gonna find more people um, speaking loudly about their fibromyalgia that they
Yeah,
can't get taken care of, or some of these other autoimmune diseases because they really need help.
sure.
So I would say complex regional pain syndrome, CRIPS, is highly up there in the workers' compensation
Mm,
world. That LDN could be very beneficial. Again, we're not medical doctors, and my opinion, I'm just giving you my opinion, but I really believe that. If it was me, that's what I would be taking. If it was my mom or dad, that's what I'd be suggesting for them in the process. So LDN is really good for that. There's tons. If anybody in the audience, if you want to just go and Google or AI like Carlos did, low dose naltrexone and a disease state, you will get a plethora of information,
mm,
as well as evidence-based articles, NIH, the whole thing. So it's really out there, and it's used a lot, and it could really benefit patients in the workers' compensation world. And the 4.5 milligram is compounded. It's not
interesting.
available any other way. It has to be compounded. So there's a very good entry point for bringing a controlled mechanism of compounding
Right.
back
Back
into
into the
the
system.
the
Yeah.
system that can help these patients.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. I had read along the line somewhere, Robert, and again, I tend to read a lot of things, and I know that the internet is not entirely the best source for reliable information. But I had read somewhere that PTSD was among the conditions that LDN potentially could be utilized for. How does that work?
Well, PTSD, and that's a good question. PTSD is more in the head, in the
Mhm.
brain, than it is in the body. So, but remember we talked about how the microglia affect the entire nervous system, and I think I did say brain. So it's the brain is the same process of things that are going on. So just as you can calm down these thoughts, and PTSD is it's a reactory thought to things that have happened to you in the past, and it's really an involvement of your neurosenses, firing off more than they should. And so that's the thought behind using it with PTSD. First responders, fire, police, things like that. They're seeing these traumatic things happening in front of them. And low dose naltrexone, again, in my opinion, is something that could really help calm them down,
Mhm.
calm that down. The other thing is sleep. We didn't mention sleep. And it's kind of a natural thing that once people are on low dose naltrexone and their nervous system is modulating and calming down, their sleep becomes better. And what happens when your sleep is better? Well, your body can
Right.
heal better,
Right.
right? And your body's healing better. It's just all of these factors that are coming
Yeah.
together.
I know that here in the state of California, we happen to be in California today, but in California, I believe LDN is on the drug formulary. It is something that can be prescribed to injured workers. It is something that can be reimbursed for
Hmm.
injured workers, which is
Hmm.
great. Across the country, every state is different. The barriers of entry for certain medications are different from one state to the next. From your perspective, in order for us to be able to use this more regularly for these conditions, right? What do we need to overcome? Is it a regulatory barrier? Is it a financial barrier? First of all, is LDN or low dose naltrexone, is it expensive?
No, it's very reasonably priced.
Okay, so it's very reasonably priced. Clearly, there again is a fair amount of literature out there already for its efficacy. What barriers do we need to overcome nationally, right, in order to make this more readily available for? I'm thinking, right off the bat, right, we work with a lot of municipalities, right? So I'm thinking maybe firefighters that deal with PTSD, maybe police officers deal with PTSD, maybe our injured workers that are dealing with crips or chronic pain or any other pain condition, right? What barriers do we need to overcome, in your opinion, in order to make this more readily available?
I It needs to be reimbursed.
Yeah, yeah,
It needs to be reimbursed and not looked at as Wild West voodoo,
right.
which is a lot of times people start thinking within the work comp world that like this particular drug is, whatever, snake oil, right?
Mm,
But you switch it around and you're in professional sports and they're using it every day
right.
and loving it and swearing by it. And I think it's the greatest thing ever. And it is. And so it's a industry effect that we need to somehow tell the story, and we need to let it in a
Yeah,
controlled way
yeah,
and let these people get better. It doesn't cause drowsiness either.
right.
So you can the person can go back to work. They can go back to work and over 6 months, 8 months, 9 months, they can start modulating that immune system and packing it down. And the next thing you know, it's kind of like, you take an antibiotic for 3 days or 4 days and you go, yeah, I feel great. Right. And then you stop your antibiotic
Yeah.
and bad news, right?
Mm,
It comes back. So they're going to experience that same feeling. You might be asking me, like, so how are you feeling? Low dose naltrexone is working for you? Oh yeah, I think so. Well, good. Well, how are you sleeping? Oh, I sleep great every night. Oh, interesting.
hmm,
What else are you doing? Oh, hey, we're going on vacation. Oh, you are.
right.
Oh, okay. Because all of a sudden they are modulating and they are getting under control and they are feeling better.
I just want to reiterate to our audience, Robert, this isn't medical advice, and it's not that we are advocating for the use of low dose naltrexone for any condition, but having a conversation around opening our minds, right, and really being able to look at information in an objective way. What is actually working, right? And working with providers and working with patients to come up with alternatives to more dangerous options. I'm thinking of opioids. We're thinking, if LDN, low dose naltrexone, becomes more widely adopted in the world of workers' comp, think about the need for opioids at that point, which is clearly a very dangerous medication. We had an epidemic of people dying from opioids. And that, in part, probably fueled a lot of the skepticism behind pharmacy and the world of workers' comp, just because of, the nightmares that we all face through the opioid crisis, and not just in comp, but just in group health in general. There were just people getting addicted and dying. You
That's
know,
the problem with
it,
opioids.
it's wild. So if we can replace a highly dangerous medication like an opioid with, according to what was it, ACDA Stanford reference guide, a medication that has a much lower side effect profile, why wouldn't we consider doing that?
I agree. And it's not a on Monday you take the opioid and on Wednesday you're taking low dose naltrexone.
Right.
There's, as you said, opioids are addicted. So you have somebody who's chronic pain, but they're taking opioids. You can't just say gone and here you go.
Right.
It's not going to work.
Right.
Just to explain for a second, if you have a cell that has receptor sites for opioids, the normal one has maybe two or three.
Mm,
So you have pain. You take an opioid, it goes in there and blocks those receptor sites. You don't have pain. But interesting thing is that the cell can grow more receptor sites. And
mm,
that's how we get into this addictive potential. So now you have the cell that went, I like that.
mm,
I'm going to grow three more. And then the patient's like, it doesn't work. I
right.
need more.
More.
And
Yeah.
it's really this crazy scenario. The other thing about the cell, though, is that the cell also can get rid of the receptor sites. That's withdrawal, and that's time, right? So if you have a chronic opioid patient, you're going to have to taper them off and add low dose. Again, in my opinion, as pharmacist and the things that I know, other other situations you could start them on low dose naltrexone and have a very successful outcome. I think.
Well, I think it begs a conversation, that's for sure. And I think that, we have a lot of very reputable research institutions out there. I'm thinking of CWCI here in California. I'm thinking of WCRI in Massachusetts. There are
WKRP in Cincinnati.
absolutely the IABC and SAGA. There are tons of associations out there that can research this, that can specifically come out with guidance, ACOM and ODG, right?
Mhm.
I want to hear from them from their researchers about how and how we can make this readily available, but also is it efficacious for these conditions from their viewpoint. And let's look at the literature altogether. Let's
They
get
should absolutely be evaluated.
yeah, at
100%.
100%.
Yep.
So great point. I wanna focus on you as a leader here, Robert, because I find you very intriguing. A pharmacist's son. I kind of think of like a preacher's kid here for to some degree. Maybe not so much, but you don't look like a preacher's
Uh,
kid at all. Um, Not that that's a good or a bad thing for
I
preachers'
didn't
kids
say
out there, preachers' kids out there. Um, from a leader perspective, Robert, you've got something that you've built here over a lifetime, right? Since you started working with your father in what'd you say, second grade, third grade?
third grade.
You've built this amazing, group of companies. You've hired almost 100 employees, you said, and you're doing well, right? Has there been a moment as a leader throughout your career that, man, you just had a really tough decision to make, right? As a leader myself, there are those decisions that they keep you up at night. What was it for you? What was that tough decision or decisions that you had to make as a entrepreneur? And how did you navigate them?
It's not really a singular decision that you have to make. I feel this obligation to my employees. I have sisters that work here. I've had husbands and wives. I have grandmothers and grandkids. I have, you know, people who have had their kids have been and then they've retired and the kids. We're very family. And
Mm,
I feel personally obligated to not only take care of my own family, which is why most people are in business, right?
right.
But also I feel like I need to take care of everybody
Mm,
else as well. And it's important to me. So my decision was during COVID.
right.
And so during COVID, I made a decision that we are going to work and I'm not going to let people go without work
Mm,
and they can bring their kids here if they have to.
wow.
And that was my decision. My decision was if you want to come here, you can come here, save space. We're going to do our work. We are essential. We were, considered an
Hmm.
essential business. And a lot of people had their kids here. Sometimes we'd have like a nursery. We have 12, 15 kids
Wow.
running around because what are they going to do? They can't leave them at home.
Right.
And
Right.
to do that, and mom needs to come to work because they need. It's not like they just go out with any money.
Right.
And our business dropped 50%, 60%.
Wow.
And my decision was, no, we're not closing the doors.
Mm,
We're gonna make it work. And I think that just goes all the way back to my dad of
yeah.
teaching me that it's just not about you as a I am not the same type of businessman as a lot of people are. I'm
Yeah.
more about I love my company. I love growing. To me, it's like playing with Legos. I like building and creating more so than a spreadsheet and a bank account.
I love it.
And then I like taking care of my employees.
I want to clarify when you say you work with husbands and wives, they're not your husbands and wives, they're
Right.
other people's
That
husbands.
is correct.
Just in case anybody was out there, misinterpreting that. As leaders, we have both successes and failures, right? I feel some kind of way about failures, to be honest with you. I feel like, you know, much of your growth, much of your learning is done through failure, right?
Absolutely.
But everybody's different. And I'm curious, as a leader yourself, as a long-time entrepreneur, do you value successes differently than failures? What is your mindset around those two areas?
I'm a firm believer that you have to fail to succeed. And, that's not something that I created, but it's something that has worked for me. When you're failing, you're not thinking about that.
Yeah.
When you're failing, I've had some really bad things happen and some very serious changes and ups and downs in my life. And after I have gotten through them, you have to power through a failure. You have to be willing to get through the failure, stand up, dust yourself off, and say, okay,
Mm,
going forward. I'm not going to give up. I'm going to go forward and make it happen. And that's when you get success from the failure. It's
mm,
people who fail and give up and go away,
that's true.
they don't get the success.
Yeah. That's a great way of putting it. In our industry, we talk at length about mentoring. We talk at length about the next generation taking on, the leadership roles. Of course, we've gone through this great resignation period, right? We've gone through this period of trying to figure out how are we going to replace all of these boomer and Gen Xers, right, that are exiting our industry with a new generation. What is your philosophy on mentoring? How do you feel about mentoring?
I love mentoring. To me, you know, somebody to come back to me and say, I did this because of you. You inspired me to do this. And I don't think there's any greater gift that you could have. And so I try to mentor whenever I can. My mentoring is by listening and asking questions about where they want to go and how they want to get there. I'll pepper it with experience and advice. But what I really try to do is be that supportive person, that encouraging person, the person that can help them reach their highways. And I do. I have quite a few people that come back to me and say, "Remember when you taught me at USC, 20 years ago? Now I have my own compounding pharmacy. I wouldn't have it if it wasn't for you."
Wow.
So I'm just like, it's just like, you know, feels good.
Yeah.
Feels good.
You feel like you had a hand in creating the next step, right, for people to succeed, and that feels good. I'm reminded just of the characteristics that you were explaining about your dad, that made it more about others than making about himself,
Mhm.
which is an awesome trait to inherit from your father. The show is called Live Lead Legacy, right? And I'm wondering, in your words, what type of legacy do you hope that your companies leave? What type of fingerprint do you want them to leave in this world?
That's a hard question because one form of legacy is you leave a company that's ongoing and it continues, and they say, yeah, 60 years ago Robert Nickell built this company and now it's a global whatever, right? Do I want that? I don't know. I think as far as a personal legacy, I would like for the pharmaceutical world to feel as if I put a touch on the profession. And somehow I helped other pharmacists through mentoring. Somehow I helped the universities through education and talking. And somehow I helped make changes in the pharmaceutical world. And it just made me think of what we've been talking about is exactly that. It's time
Yeah,
for the change
right.
between workers' compensation, prescription drugs, compounded drugs, and it's time to change and find a way for the patients to get the help and the treatment that they need without it being considered the dirty wild west from
Mm,
here. And I really think that outside of work comp, many people who work in work comp, when they're outside, they're like, "Oh yeah, my daughter got this compounded drug and it was really great. Oh yeah, my mom got it." So it's really not. I think
yeah,
I don't think we're as far apart as
yeah,
some people say.
yeah.
But anyway, but that's what I would like to do. I would like to be my legacy, just that I helped in the transitional process of the future of growth of pharmacy.
It's fascinating, and I'm just going to take a sidebar here, Robert, but I think it's worth mentioning. A lot of people wish that workers' comp was treated like group health and like other healthcare sectors because there's it's the same people at home as at work, right? So why should we treat the medical care separately and differently, right? There has been a move to eventually do away with the work comp system, right? And make it all just one payer system, a single payer system where there's no differentiation between group health and workers comp. It's a novel idea. It's interesting because we treat our bodies one way when we face disability and a need to heal outside of work versus the way that we treat our bodies and our healthcare when we are injured at work, as if our body recovers differently based on the origin of injury. Doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me, but again, things to think about, right? So you make a very valid point there. There's no such thing as perfection. And as we start to wrap up today, Robert, I want to ask you a very honest question. Pharmacy, like many other industries, has had its faults, its flaws. right? The finance world had, the mortgage debacle that happened not too long ago, right? The Wall Street debacles that happen seemingly on a regular basis. If there was one thing that you would say, as a pharmacist, as a person of influence in the pharmacy space nationally, perhaps even globally, what would you like to see change in that vertical for the better? You know pharmacy inside and out, sideways and back, right? What are some of the things that you feel as an industry pharmacy needs to do better or more of in the interest of continuing to improve quality? Right. I'm just thinking in today's world, and I'll just be frank with you here, and this is totally off script, but there's a lot of skepticism about, big pharma, right? A lot of skepticism about certain medications out there. The opioid crisis was a big driver for that, right? What does pharmacy, the world of pharmacy, and that I'm thinking is at the highest levels, right? What does the world of pharmacy need to do in order to maybe earn that trust back? And if it's already back, if people already trust it, increase that trust, the public perception of pharmacy, in your opinion.
There's a lot. There's a lot of things there that fly through my head while you're
Mhm.
talking. One is new drug entry, more affordable. If you can't afford to be at the poker table, you'll never get to play the game. And right now, the way it's set up, you can't really get past big pharma. It's the bar is too high, and FDA also has made the bar too high. So that needs to be loosened up in some way. I think pharmacy seems to change and correct itself. We went through the mail order pharmacies. Right now, we're in telehealth. The whole telehealth industry is becoming stronger and stronger every day, and more prescriptions are running through the telehealth world. Compounded drugs, too. I would say in the telehealth world, it's probably 80% compounded drugs, 20% commercial.
Really interesting.
Yeah, it is. And it's a lot of patients and a lot of prescriptions. And it kind of shows that, and it's all cash. Patients are willing to pay to get these medications. There's a lot of industries, the big boys, for example, the one that's named after the river and the one that used to own a basketball team, who think that they can make the drug supply chain better because they can make everything else better. The drug supply chain is a very interesting animal, and you really can't jump in and just make a change.
Mm.
It kind of happens organically, and as what people need as the world is changing. My own personal self, I wish, as everybody probably does, Melancholy, I wish we were back to corner drugstores
Mm.
and the corner drugstore
Yeah.
pharmacists could at least get paid enough to
Mm.
afford to be open, because that was such a great gatekeeper, such a great person that was always available, always available. In my dad's pharmacy corner drugstore, we would go and work on Sundays after church. And my dad and I go, "How come we have to work on Sunday?" He goes, "Well, because I need to give my employees a day off." But he wasn't going to take a day off from his customers, from his
Interesting.
patients.
Yeah.
So our whole family was down there. And that's how we did it. And it's that level of care in the pharmacy world is going away.
Mm.
That would be great to have that back in some way. So I think lower cost of entry on drugs so that it levels the playing field. And I think allowing the pharmacists to be pharmacists is just would be an amazing part of healthcare.
Well, Robert, you've given us a lot to chew on today, a lot of information, some information I didn't even understand. So I'll have to watch this podcast multiple times.
That was the layman's term. I was doing it easy.
But I really do appreciate you taking the time. And this, I believe, needs to be an ongoing conversation. And we're going to create more opportunities for stakeholders in the system to have their day on the platform, everyone from PBMs to payers, to talk about what are their main concerns about pharmacy
Mhm.
and where we're at. Where are we going? Are we doing things the most efficient way for injured workers, right? And so those are questions that I feel we need to continue to ask ourselves within the work comp industry. Thank you again so much. I wish you
Thank
all
you,
the
sir.
best.
Appreciate it.
And for those of you watching, You can connect with Robert Nickell on LinkedIn. I'll be sure and add the website addresses for each of his companies so that you can take a look. And as always, if you have someone that you believe can benefit from this content, please share the information. We would be honored to be able to help someone in need that is in need of this type of guidance. So thank you again. Until next time, live, lead, legacy.